The elevator hummed as it carried Khloe Bennett higher and higher through the steel heart of Manhattan. 60 floors of glass, marble, and money pressed around her, and though her blazer was freshly pressed, she found herself adjusting it for the 10th time. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, soft but steady. Coffee helps with difficult moments. That was why she clutched the thermos in her hand like a lifeline, the faint warmth of it grounding her as the metallic voice announced, 47th floor. When the doors opened, Khloe stepped into a world that seemed carved from power itself. Italian marble gleamed under her heels, crystal chandeliers refracted the morning light into sharp diamonds, and the panoramic windows stretched Manhattan out before her like an empire waiting to be conquered. Men and women in immaculate suits moved swiftly through the lobby, their expensive leather briefcases swinging like weapons. This was Carter Industries, an empire whispered about even in her small town of Savannah, Georgia. She had dreamed of this day for years, but standing here now, her pulse drummed like she was walking into foreign territory. "You must be Khloe Bennett." The voice was crisp, female, and carried authority. Khloe turned to see a tall blonde woman, every hair perfectly in place, her professional smile sharp but hollow. "Yes, ma'am," Khloe answered quickly. "I'm Margaret Collins, Director of Human Resources. Follow me." As they walked, Margaret's heels clicked a staccato rhythm against the marble, echoing like a countdown. She pointed out glass-walled conference rooms that seemed more like fish bowls for the powerful, a break room gleaming with a coffee machine imported from Italy, and rows of workstations filled with focused employees who barely looked up. "You'll be responsible for Mr. Robert Carter's schedule," Margaret explained. "He demands perfected, an absolute punctuality, complete discretion. Anything less is unacceptable." Khloe nodded, though her stomach clenched. She had expected challenge, but something about the sharpness in Margaret's tone suggested a warning more than instruction. They stopped before a set of imposing double doors, dark wood gleaming, a gold nameplate engraved with authority. Robert Carter, Chief Executive Officer. "Your desk," Margaret gestured, "is here. You'll want to be early. Mr. Carter always arrives at precisely 7:30. And it's..." She glanced at her watch. 7:25. Khloe's palms dampened. She smoothed the bun at the back of her head, checked her reflection in the computer screen, and inhaled. The sound came then. Footsteps in the corridor, steady and unhurried, yet carrying a weight that shifted the air itself. Margaret stiffened. "He's here," she whispered. And then he appeared. Robert Carter. Tall, broad-shouldered, the charcoal gray suit clinging to him as if it had been stitched onto his frame. Dark hair tousled by the morning wind, a jaw carved in uncompromising lines. But it was his eyes, sharp green, glinting with something between ice and fire, that caught Khloe off guard. They landed on her, holding her in place, as though measuring her soul in a single glance. "Mrs. Collins." His voice was deep, cultured, each syllable rolling like a command. "This is my new secretary?" "Yes, Mr. Carter. Khloe Bennett, University of Georgia graduate. Excellent references." "Miss Bennett," he cut in, extending his hand. "I hope you're prepared for this company's pace." Her fingers met his, and for one fleeting second heat shot up her arm, unexpected, unwanted. His grip was firm, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. "I'm more than prepared, Mr. Carter," she said, steadying her voice. Something flickered in his eyes then, approval, maybe even surprise, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "We'll see." He released her hand. "Coffee in 5 minutes, schedule on my desk by 9. And just like that, he swept into his office, leaving the echo of his presence hanging in the air. Margaret exhaled, almost in relief. "Welcome," she said dryly, "to Hurricane Carter." Khloe lowered herself into her chair, her hand still tingling from the handshake. She should have felt intimidated, maybe even frightened. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous, curiosity. There was a man behind those green eyes, she was certain, a man trapped beneath the ruthless mask. What she didn't know, as Robert Carter leaned against his desk behind the closed door, was that he was thinking of her too. The determination in her eyes had caught him off guard, and though he would never admit it, not yet, something had shifted in the air the moment their hands touched. Whispers floated down the hallway, fragments of conversations not meant for her ears. Engagement, Harrington family, alliance, words that meant little now, but would soon twist her entire world. Because Robert Carter's ruthless reputation wasn't the only thing waiting for her inside Carter Industries. A storm was brewing, one that would draw her into a lie, a kiss, and a love she never could have imagined. The morning after her first encounter with Robert Carter, Khloe arrived at Carter Industries earlier than usual. She thought she might have a few quiet minutes to settle in, but the 47th floor was already alive with movement. Assistants hurried down the corridors with files clutched to their chests. Department heads whispered in urgent tones, and even Margaret Collins looked unusually tense as she typed furiously at her computer. It was as though the entire building pulsed to the rhythm of one man's heartbeat, and that man had already been here for hours. Khloe smoothed the front of her blazer and glanced toward the massive wooden doors that guarded Robert Carter's office. The memory of their handshake lingered, sharp as lightning in her mind. She had felt something in that instant, a strange pull she couldn't explain. Yet she also remembered the coldness in his voice, the way he had demanded perfection without hesitation. She had promised herself she wouldn't be intimidated, but there was something about him that made resistance feel like standing against a storm. At exactly 7:30, the door swung open. Robert stepped out, suit jacket unbuttoned, sleeves rolled to the elbows as though even expensive fabric couldn't contain his restless energy. His gaze scanned the room, and the air seemed to freeze. People lowered their voices, straightened their posture, and for a moment Khloe understood why they called him ruthless. He didn't need to raise his voice to command obedience. His silence was sharper than most men's fury. "Miss Bennett," his voice carried across the lobby, "bring me the Tokyo file. Now." Khloe's heart kicked in her chest. She had never been told where the Tokyo file was, but she refused to let panic show on her face. She strode to the filing cabinets, quickly scanning the labeled drawers. When she found it, she pulled the thick folder free and walked into his office. He was already seated at his desk, flipping through emails on a tablet. Without looking up, he extended a hand. She placed the file in his palm. "Good," he said finally, glancing at her. "You didn't waste time." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but the flicker of acknowledgement in his green eyes felt like a small victory. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and constant demands. Robert moved through each task like a machine, sharp and unyielding. Yet Khloe noticed small details others seemed too afraid to see. The way he tapped his pen when someone hesitated on a conference call. The flash of irritation in his eyes when a director stumbled over a presentation, and beneath it all, something else, a restlessness that went deeper than business. By noon, Khloe had memorized his rhythm. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them, sliding papers across the desk at the exact moment he reached for them, adjusting schedules before conflicts arose. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same piercing intensity he had shown on her first day. "You're quick, Miss Bennett," he said, "quicker than most. But speed without precision is useless. Make one mistake, and you're gone." Khloe's pulse spiked, but she lifted her chin. "I don't make the same mistake twice." A dangerous smile curved his mouth. "We'll see." That afternoon, while the office hummed with activity, Khloe overheard two senior associates whispering by the elevators. They spoke of Robert's father, of a deal that had been delayed, of a marriage arrangement with a woman from another powerful family. The words slipped like smoke through the air, impossible to grasp fully but heavy with implication. Khloe returned to her desk unsettled. Robert Carter was already a storm, impossible to predict. But if the rumors were true, there was another storm coming, one far more personal. She had no way of knowing yet that the first thunderclap would shatter her world in a way she couldn't walk away from, because behind Robert's ruthless mask was a man being pushed into a cage. And the only key to his freedom, though neither of them knew it yet, was the very woman who now sat outside his door. The third morning dawned gray over Manhattan, and the clouds seemed to press heavily against the skyscrapers, as if even the sky knew tension was brewing. Khloe Bennett arrived at her desk early, hoping for a smooth start, but the energy on the 47th floor was different. The usual rhythm of phone calls and shuffling papers had been replaced with a nervous silence, employees stealing glances toward the elevator as though waiting for a storm to break. The storm, arrived in the form of Richard Carter. The elder Carter swept onto the floor with the force of a general marching into battle. His silver hair was combed back with precision, his three-piece suit gleamed, and his expression carried the weight of a man who expected entire cities to bend to his will. Khloe stood immediately, startled by his sudden presence, but he didn't spare her a glance. His eyes were fixed on the double doors that guarded his son's office. "Where is Robert?" he demanded in a voice that was not raised but still carried like thunder. "He is in a meeting, sir," Khloe managed to say, but Richard was already striding past her desk, his polished shoes striking the floor with authority. He pushed open the heavy doors without hesitation, ignoring her attempt to stop him. The sound of voices rose almost instantly. Robert's deep, controlled tone clashed with his father's commanding bark. Khloe froze at her desk, professionalism telling her to stay put, curiosity pulling her closer. The door had not closed fully, and through the narrow gap she saw Robert standing tall behind his desk, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. "I told you, father, I will not discuss this now." Robert's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "And I told you, you have wasted enough time," Richard shot back. "The Harringtons have been patient for months. Madison is expecting an answer." Chloe's breath caught. The Harringtons. Madison. An arranged marriage. Suddenly the whispers she had overheard the day before came alive with cruel clarity. Robert's hands pressed against the mahogany desk, his knuckles white. "Maybe she is an excellent choice," he said bitterly, "but I am the one who will have to live with her for the rest of my life." "You will live very well," Richard countered with a sneer, "with wealth and alliances that will keep this empire growing. That is your duty." Khloe felt her stomach twist. Duty. That was the word that had shackled men for centuries, and here in this gleaming skyscraper, it still had power. She should have turned away, should have forced herself back to her spreadsheets, but she could not move. She was witnessing a cage being locked around a man who looked like he belonged to no one. Robert stepped around the desk, his voice lower but even more dangerous. "I am not cattle to be sold at an auction. I will not marry for business." Richard laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think love will keep this company alive? Your mother and I had an arranged marriage for 35 years. It was functional. That is all that matters." The word functional landed like a stone in the room. Chloe's chest tightened as she realized what it meant. Robert's coldness, his iron walls, his refusal to show weakness. He had been raised to believe that function was enough, and everything else was a liability. "You have until the end of the month," his father declared. "I have scheduled dinner with the Harringtons this Saturday. You will attend. You will agree." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Robert's steady breath. Khloe pulled back just in time as Richard stormed out of the office. His eyes flicked to her as if noticing her for the first time. He studied her a moment, his expression sharp and cold. "You're new here," he said. "Yes, sir, 1 week. In this family we keep our private matters private, understood?" "Perfectly, sir," Khloe replied, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Richard gave a curt nod and disappeared into the elevator. Seconds later, a crash sounded inside Robert's office, the sharp shatter of glass against the wall. Without thinking, Khloe rushed to the door and knocked softly. "Come in." Robert's voice was rougher than usual. She stepped inside. A crystal vase lay broken on the floor, glittering like fallen stars. Robert stood with his hands buried in his pockets, staring out over Manhattan, but there was no triumph in his stance, only exhaustion. "It wasn't an accident," he muttered without turning. Khloe picked up the broom from the corner. "Sometimes it's better to break a vase than to break something that cannot be fixed." That made him look at her. His green eyes burned with an intensity that almost made her step back. "You heard everything. I heard enough," she admitted softly. "And what is your opinion on arranged marriages, Miss Bennett?" Khloe swallowed her fear. I think every person deserves the right to choose who they spend their life with. Love is not nonsense. It is the only thing that makes life worth living. For a moment he just stared at her as though he were trying to decide if she was brave or foolish. Then the corner of his mouth curved into something that looked like the ghost of a smile. "That is a very optimistic view," he said. "It's a realistic one," she corrected. "Happiness is not a luxury, Mr. Carter. It is a right." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe gratitude, maybe something more. But before he could reply, his mask slid back into place. "Cancel my Saturday appointments," he ordered. "I have a family dinner to attend." Khloe nodded, but as she turned to leave, she spoke once more, her voice soft but steady. "Sometimes courage is not about fighting monsters. Sometimes it is simply saying no at the right time." The door closed behind her, and Robert stood motionless, staring at the skyline. For the first time in years, he wondered what it would feel like to stop obeying and start choosing. And somewhere deep inside him, a seed of rebellion began to take root. The day of the Harrington dinner arrived with Manhattan wrapped in rain. Thin silver streams streaked down the windows of Carter Industries, turning the city into a blur of lights and shadows. Khloe tried to focus on the stack of contracts before her, but her mind kept drifting to the words she had overheard in Robert's office. Dinner, Harrington, engagement. Each syllable felt like a clock ticking closer to something inevitable. Robert had been quieter than usual all morning. His movements were precise, but there was an edge to them, like a blade pressed too hard against its sheath. By the time afternoon arrived, the tension in his office was thick enough to cut. Khloe had just returned from delivering a report when voices carried from the hallway. A woman's crystalline tone, sharp as broken glass, floated through the air. "I simply don't understand why he's being so difficult. It's just a marriage, not a death sentence." Robert's jaw clenched at his desk before the door even opened. He knew who it was. The handle turned without ceremony, and Madison Harrington walked in as if she owned the floor. She was the very image of Manhattan's elite, draped in a camel wool coat and diamonds that sparkled like icy stars. Behind her came Richard Carter, his expression thunderous, and the air shifted instantly. Employees who had been passing in the hall slowed their steps, pretending to be busy but clearly listening. Robert rose from his chair, but not to greet them. His eyes, hard and sharp, locked first on his father, then on Madison. "What is this?" Robert asked coldly. "We came to finalize the engagement announcement," Richard replied, settling heavily into a chair. "The Times is waiting for our confirmation." Khloe, still by her desk, felt her chest tighten. She should leave, she told herself, give privacy to what was clearly family business. But before she could stand, Madison's icy blue gaze landed on her. "And who is this?" Madison asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "My secretary," Robert answered, the words clipped. Madison's painted smile widened. "How charming. I suppose she will be dismissed when we marry. I prefer to bring my own staff." The insult was deliberate, her eyes never leaving Khloe's face. Khloe's cheeks heated, but she forced her shoulders back, unwilling to look away. "No one is being dismissed," Robert's voice sliced through the room like steel, "and there is no engagement to be announced." The silence that followed was absolute. Madison's smile faltered, her mask cracking for the first time. "Robert, you can't be serious after Saturday's dinner," she protested. "I thought it was clear." What became clear, Robert stepped out from behind his desk with measured steps, is that all of you seem to have forgotten that I have the right to choose my own wife. "Don't be ridiculous," Richard snapped. "You have a duty to this family, to this company." "I have a duty to myself," Robert countered, "and I will not marry someone I do not love." Madison laughed then, sharp and brittle. "Love," she said with mockery. "Marriage is about partnership and empire building. Love is for ordinary people." Her gaze flicked to Khloe when she said ordinary, and the condescension in it made hot anger rise in Khloe's chest. She had heard that tone all her life, people measuring her worth by her small-town roots. Before she could stop herself, her voice rang through the office, steady and clear. Love is what makes someone extraordinary. The room froze. Madison stared at her as if she were an insect that had dared to speak. Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously, but Robert's expression changed in an instant. For the first time, Khloe saw not just the ruthless heir, but a man who looked at her as though she were the only person in the world. "Excuse me," Madison hissed, "but I don't recall asking for the help's opinion." "She is not help." Robert's voice was low, dangerous. "She is." He moved then, 3 long strides across the office, and before Khloe could understand what was happening, his hands framed her face, and his mouth was on hers. The kiss was not polite. It was fire and defiance, frustration and freedom. It carried years of being caged by duty, months of pressure, and one wild, desperate choice. A world outside vanished. All Khloe felt was the heat of his lips, the strength of his hands, and the way her own body betrayed her by melting into him. When he finally pulled back, his arm slid around her waist, and his voice came calm, almost casual, though his pulse thundered against her side. "Dad, Madison, I'd like you to meet my girlfriend." The shock that followed was electric. Madison's lips parted, her composure shattered. Richard's face darkened with fury, and Khloe stood frozen, her heart racing, knowing that a single impulsive kiss had just rewritten everything. What none of them realized yet was that this desperate act would not only save Robert from a marriage he despised, it would entangle them in a lie so dangerous and so irresistible that it would change both of their lives forever. The echo of Robert's declaration still lingered in the air long after Madison's heels clicked out of the building and Richard Carter stormed into the elevator with a face carved from fury. The office floor remained strangely silent, whispers racing like wildfire through every corner of Carter Industries. Employees avoided looking directly at Khloe, but she could feel their eyes burning into her, the secretary who had just been kissed by Manhattan's most ruthless billionaire, as if she were the only woman in the world. By the time the morning meetings ended, Robert appeared at the doorway of her desk. His expression was unreadable, sharp lines of tension still etched across his face, but his voice was calm. "Miss Bennett, come into my office. We need to talk." Khloe followed him inside, her legs unsteady though she forced herself to walk with composure. When he closed the door behind her, the noise of the outside world vanished. He gestured for her to sit, but instead of returning to his desk, he pulled a chair across from hers and sat facing her. A gesture so unexpectedly intimate that her pulse quickened. First, he said, running a hand through his dark hair, "I owe you an apology. I dragged you into a personal war you never signed up for." Khloe folded her hands in her lap. "You were cornered," she said softly. "I understand." "Understanding doesn't erase the fact that I kissed you without permission," he replied, "or that the entire city may believe you are my girlfriend by tomorrow morning." Khloe's chest tightened. "Then what now?" she asked. Robert leaned forward, his emerald eyes locking onto hers with a rare vulnerability. "I have a proposal. I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend. Not just today, not just this week. For months. Until my father and Madison finally understand that I will never marry for business." Khloe blinked at him. "Pretend," she repeated. "Yes, we attend family dinners together, charity events, appearances where Madison and my father will try to corner me. If they believe this relationship is serious, they will have no ground left." She stared at him, stunned by the audacity of what he was asking. Pretend to be the billionaire's lover in front of the entire elite of Manhattan. It sounded like madness. It also sounded like danger. "And what exactly would this involve?" she asked carefully. Robert exhaled as though he had rehearsed this moment. "Public appearances, occasional displays of affection, nothing you are uncomfortable with. I'll compensate you fairly. Double your salary plus a bonus when this is over." Khloe bit her lip. Her mind spun with the weight of the offer. The money would erase her debts and help her mother back home, but there was a deeper risk, one that had nothing to do with finances. "If we do this," she said firmly, "there must be rules." His brows rose. "Rules. No surprise kisses. If affection is required, I want advance notice. Second, I keep my independence. I'm not your accessory. My intelligence and work still matter. And third, she paused, heat rising to her cheeks. If either of us feels something real, we talk about it. No lies, no pretending inside this office. Robe. Art's jaw tightened. Emotional complications, he said slowly. Yes, she replied evenly. Forced intimacy can blur lines. If that happens, we face it honestly. For a moment, the only sound was the faint tick of the antique clock on his wall. Then Robert nodded once. Deal. She extended her hand. Their palms met, and again that jolt of electricity surged between them stronger than before. His gaze darkened, but he released her hand quickly, as if holding it too long would set fire to everything he had built. Very well, he said, his voice softer than before. Tonight, dinner at my apartment. We need to rehearse our story before anyone else questions us. Khloe swallowed. Dinner at his home. Alone. As she left the office, her heart raced with a dangerous realization. The kiss that had begun as a desperate escape had now bound her to Robert Carter in a web of lies and appearances. Yet somewhere deep inside her, a whisper of truth stirred, a truth far more terrifying than the lie itself. She wasn't afraid of pretending to be his girlfriend. She was afraid of what would happen if she forgot it was only pretend. The black limousine cut silently through the manicured streets of the Hamptons as the Carter mansion loomed into view. The estate rose like a monument to power, its white columns glowing under the golden evening lights, its vast gardens trimmed to perfection. To Khloe, it looked less like a home and more like a battlefield. Tonight was not just dinner. Tonight was her trial. Beside her, Robert adjusted his cufflinks, though his jaw was tight and his gaze fixed on the horizon. His usual composure seemed thinner tonight, as if even he could feel the weight of what awaited them. She watched the faint muscle twitch in his cheek and realized for the first time that he was nervous. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered, surprising herself with the softness in her voice. His head turned and those green eyes locked on her. "It isn't me I'm worried about," he admitted. "It's them. They will dissect you with every glance, and they are merciless." Khloe inhaled slowly, feeling the delicate necklace he had placed around her neck earlier that evening, the one that had belonged to his mother. She touched it for courage. "Let them try," she said. "I've been underestimated my whole life." The limousine pulled up to the circular drive, and the great front doors opened before they even reached them. A butler in black tails ushered them into a hall that smelled faintly of cedar and polished marble. Chandeliers glittered overhead, and portraits of Carter ancestors gazed down with cold, painted eyes. Robert's Aunt Patricia was the first to greet them. She embraced Robert warmly before turning to Khloe with a curious tilt of her head. "And this must be the young woman we've all heard so little about," she said with a smile that felt genuine. "Robert never tells us anything." Khloe returned the smile, forcing calm into her voice. "That's because he values his privacy. I'm still discovering that myself." A ripple of laughter softened the tension in the room, and Robert's fingers brushed hers in subtle approval as they moved deeper inside. The drawing room was filled with about 15 members of the Carter clan, along with a scattering of important allies. Champagne glasses sparkled in their hands, and conversation halted the moment Robert entered with Khloe at his side. Eyes followed them like hawks measuring, weighing, waiting for cracks to appear. Then an elderly voice rose near the fireplace. "So this is the girl who managed to tame our lone wolf." Theodore Carter, Robert's grandfather, sat tall despite his 80 years. His sharp blue eyes twinkled with cunning and authority. Khloe stepped forward and inclined her head just slightly, the way she had seen women do in old films. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Carter," she said with sincerity. The old man chuckled, clearly pleased. "A lady with manners," he declared. "Refreshing. Come sit by me, Tiu. Tell me how you stole this boy's heart." Robert looked momentarily startled, but Khloe obeyed gracefully, settling beside the patriarch. For the first time that night, Robert's tense shoulders seemed to loosen, as if her composure gave him a shield. But the calm shattered when a voice sharp and mocking drifted across the room. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Madison Harrington stood in the doorway, draped in crimson silk, like a queen arriving uninvited to a coronation. At her side was a tall blonde man with the glossy arrogance of old money. Robert's father appeared behind them, his expression unreadable. "I didn't know you were coming tonight," he said tightly. "Daddy invited me," Madison answered sweetly, though her eyes burned like ice when they landed on Khloe. "I do hope you don't mind." The room stiffened. Khloe felt the weight of every gaze pivot toward her. Madison moved closer, her lips curved in a smile that carried poison. "So this is the great romance," she purred. "The secretary who captured Robert Carter." Khloe kept her back straight and her voice steady. "Yes, and I intend to prove that I belong here." For a heartbeat, silence hung in the air. Then Theodore's cane tapped the floor once. Bold words, he said with a grin. "I like her already." Robert moved to stand behind Khloe, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder. His voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it in that room, but it carried undeniable authority. "I've already decided. She's the one." The atmosphere shifted like a storm front rolling in. Madison's smile cracked, Richard's eyes darkened, and whispers surged through the family. But Robert didn't falter. His hand stayed on Khloe's shoulder, steady and unyielding. The game had changed. Tonight was no longer about duty or arrangement. Tonight was about defiance. And Khloe knew in that instant that if they could survive this evening together, they could survive anything. But what she didn't know yet was they, at Madison, had not come simply to observe. She had come armed with secrets sharp enough to wound them both. The night after the Carter Mansion dinner hung heavy over Robert's penthouse. Manhattan glittered below them, but inside his home, the silence between him and Khloe was charged, alive with words unspoken. They had survived the test of his family, Theodore's approval still echoing like a blessing, but Madison's sudden appearance had left scars that neither wanted to admit. Robert poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand steady but his jaw clenched. He rarely let anyone see him shaken, yet Khloe noticed the tightness in his movements, the storm building behind his green eyes. "You were brilliant tonight," he said, finally, his voice low. "You faced them without flinching. Most people break under their stare." Khloe smiled faintly, though her hands were still trembling. "Maybe I've been underestimated so long that I stopped caring what powerful people think of me." Robert turned, then his gaze burning into her. "You do care. You care about the truth. That is why you stood up to Madison." The memory of Madison's mocking voice returned like a bitter taste. The secretary who captured Robert Carter. It had been meant to humiliate her, but instead she had answered with steady defiance. She still felt the warmth of Robert's hand on her shoulder as he declared she was the one. That single gesture had shifted something inside her. Robert set the glass aside and crossed the room until he stood only a breath away from her. His presence was overwhelming, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. "Tell me, Khloe," he said softly when we kissed in my office, "was it only an act for you?" Her breath caught. She thought of the heat of his mouth, the way her body had melted against his, the way her heart had thundered. "No," she admitted. "It wasn't an act." His eyes darkened with something dangerous. "Ood, because I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." Before she could answer, his hand lifted, fingers brushing her cheek, his touch unexpectedly tender. Then his mouth claimed hers again, slower this time, exploratory, tasting of fire and confession. It wasn't the desperate kiss of defiance. It was a kiss that asked a question neither of them dared to speak aloud. When he finally pulled back, their foreheads rested together, both breathing unevenly. "This is dangerous," Khloe whispered. "Everything worth having is," Robert replied. "But danger has a way of leaving scars." The words proved prophetic. The following morning, whispers spread through the building faster than emails. Someone had leaked photographs from the dinner at the Carter Mansion. They were blurry, taken from across the room, but clear enough to show Robert's hand on Khloe's shoulder, the way he had looked at her with a softness that was unmistakable. The society blogs exploded with headlines about the billionaire and his mysterious secretary. By noon, the board was already calling an emergency meeting. By 2 o'clock, Khloe's desk phone rang non-stop with reporters demanding comment. and by evening, a single envelope appeared on her desk, unmarked, slipped there while she was in the copy room. Inside were 3 photographs, one of her entering Robert's penthouse the night before, one of Robert pouring her wine on his balcony, and the last one, the most damning, of them kissing under the terrace lights, her hands tangled in his hair. Khloe's chest tightened as she stared at the images. Someone was watching them. Someone wanted to destroy them. When Robert saw the photographs, his expression turned lethal. "Madison," he growled. "This has her fingerprints all over it." Khloe's voice shook. "She won't stop until she ruins us." Robert's jaw hardened. "Then she'll learn what it means to declare war on me." But even as his voice dripped with ruthless certainty, Khloe knew this was no longer just about a business arrangement. They had crossed the line. The feelings because between them were no longer pretend, which meant Madison had found their most dangerous weakness. The storm broke fully on Monday morning. Carter Industries was no longer humming with routine efficiency, but buzzing with rumor, speculation, and veiled stares. The leaked photographs had made their way from gossip blogs to financial columns. What had begun as whispers about Robert Carter's secretary had become a headline splashed across every business news outlet in New York. "Robert Carter's secret romance exposed," screamed one magazine cover that someone had left on the receptionist's desk. Khloe saw it when she walked in and felt her stomach twist. It was her face on the cover, caught in the grainy photograph of Robert holding her on his balcony, his lips brushing hers under the night sky. She wanted to disappear, but instead she squared her shoulders and walked to her desk. If she faltered now, the wolves would scent blood. Robert emerged from his office minutes later, his presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly pressed, but there was a darkness in his expression that made even senior executives avert their eyes. He walked straight to Khloe's desk. "Come with me." Inside his office, the blinds were already drawn and the air heavy with tension. On his desk lay a stack of printed articles, all variations of the same story. Robert's jaw was set hard as granite. This was no coincidence, he said, his voice low. Someone orchestrated this. Someone with access. "Madison," Khloe whispered, her hands curling into fists. Robert's eyes flashed with cold fire. "She's desperate, but she's also reckless, and that makes her dangerous." Before Khloe could answer, his desk phone buzzed. Margaret Collins' nervous voice came through. "Mr. Carter, Madison Harrington is here. She says it's urgent." Robert's lips curved in a humorless smile. "Let her in." The door opened moments later, and Madison glided in as though the storm outside belonged to her. She wore white today, a silk dress that gave her an air of false innocence, but her eyes glittered with malice. "Robert, darling," she began sweetly as though nothing had happened. "You've gotten yourself into quite a mess. These photographs, this charade. Imagine how much easier life would be if you just stopped fighting." Robert leaned back in his chair, his gaze cutting. "Did you send those photographs to the press?" Madison's smile widened. "Proof is such a tedious thing, isn't it?" She said nothing more, but the silence was confirmation enough. Khloe felt fury rise in her chest. "You think you can bully us into silence with cheap tricks," she said before she could stop herself. Madison's gaze flicked to her, cold and assessing. "Us. How sweet. But you're mistaken, my dear. This isn't bullying. This is inevitability. Robert belongs to this world. And you don't." Robert stood suddenly, his height and power filling the room. His voice was sharp enough to draw blood. "You will not dictate my life, Madison. Not my company, not my future." Her mask cracked for the briefest second, a flash of rage breaking through the veneer. "You'll regret this, Robert. Both of you will." She turned on her heel and swept out, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. For a long moment the office was silent. Then Robert turned to Khloe, his face softer now but still fierce. "She won't stop. She will dig deeper. She will come after you." Khloe swallowed hard. "Then we stop pretending," she said. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean, pretending this is just an arrangement? If we keep calling it fake, Madison will always see a crack she can exploit. The truth, Robert. The truth is the only thing she can't use against us. For the first time that day, Robert's ruthless mask slipped. His hand reached for hers across the desk, his voice rough with honesty. Then here's the truth. I don't want to pretend anymore. Khloe's heart pounded in her chest. Neither do I, she whispered. But even as the words hung between them like a fragile flame, the phone rang again. This time it was Margaret, her voice tight. Mr. Carter, the board wants to see you. They're demanding an explanation. Robert's hand tightened around Khloe's. The war had left the private walls of his office. It was about to explode on the public stage. And this time, the enemy wasn't just Madison Harrington. It was the entire empire Robert Carter was born to inherit. The boardroom of Carter Industries had seen its share of battles, but none like this. 20 men and women, titans of finance and industry, sat around the polished mahogany table. Their tailored suits and diamond watches sparkled under the cold light of the chandelier, but their eyes were sharp and merciless. At the head of the table sat Richard Carter, his expression carved in stone. At his right stood Robert, unflinching, and beside him Khloe, whose presence in the room sent ripples of disdain through the board like a stone dropped in still water. The meeting began without pleasantries. Richard's voice was the first to cut through the silence. Your personal choices are threatening this company's reputation. Investors are calling, clients are concerned, and all because of your secretary. A murmur of agreement ran through the table. Khloe's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under their collective gaze. Robert's voice came low but steady. My personal life is my own. The company is stronger than it has ever been. Our numbers prove it. Numbers do not protect us from scandal, Richard snapped. You think love matters in this world? It doesn't. Alliances do. Appearances do. At that word, Madison's name seemed to hover unspoken in the air. Khloe saw the way some board members nodded slightly as if they already envisioned her at Robert's side, a perfect social match. But then Theodore Carter, the patriarch, leaned forward from his chair at the far end of the table. His 80 years had not dulled his presence. His cane tapped once against the floor, and the murmurs ceased instantly. Appearances fade, he said, his blue eyes fixed on his grandson. Alliances break, numbers rise and fall. The only thing that endures is character. The words hung heavy, unexpected, cutting across the polished greed of the room. Richard's jaw tightened, but Theodore's gaze remained steady. Robert looked at his grandfather and then at Khloe. He reached for her hand in front of everyone. When he spoke, his voice carried not just defiance, but conviction. This woman is not a scandal. She is not a mistake. She is the reason I am stronger than I have ever been, and if this board cannot respect that, then perhaps it is not I who am unfit to lead Carter Industries, but you who are unfit to follow me. Gasps broke around the table. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard's face flushed with fury. You would risk everything for her, he demanded. Robert's eyes gleamed with fire. No, I would risk everything for myself, for the right to choose my own life, for the right to love without chains. The tension was unbearable, and then, from the shadows near the door, Madison appeared. She had been listening, waiting for her moment. With a smile as sharp as a knife, she slid a manila folder onto the table. If you want to speak of character, she said sweetly, perhaps we should discuss the truth about Miss Bennet. The folder opened with a whisper of paper. Inside were photographs, documents, and a fabricated story painted in cruel ink. Claims that Khloe had been paid to play the role of Robert's lover, that she was an opportunist, a fraud, a woman who had wormed her way into the empire with lies. The board erupted in voices. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Richard Say, eyes the chance. Look at the evidence, he thundered. She was bought. This entire romance is nothing but a performance. Khloe's heart pounded, her vision swimming. The photographs Madison had gathered twisted the truth, framing moments of tenderness as staged, making their love look like a contract instead of the fragile flame it was. Robert slammed his hand against the table and the room fell silent. Enough, his voice thundered like a storm. You think love can be bought. You think she was paid to care for me. Then you know nothing of her. He turned to Khloe, his expression softer but no less fierce. Tell them the truth. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. I came here to be a secretary. That was all. I never asked for his love. I never asked for this war, but it found me. And if you think I would endure this humiliation for money, you are wrong. I endure it because I love him. The room stilled. Even Madison faltered for a moment, her mask slipping. Robert drew Khloe into his side, his arm a shield around her. Then here is my final word, he declared. If the cost of loving her is this company, then take it. But understand this. Without her, Carter Industries is just walls and marble. With her, it is a future. The room held its breath, the empire teetering on the edge. Madison's smile flickered, Richard's control cracked, and Theodore's eyes gleamed with pride. What none of them knew yet was that the next move would not be made in this boardroom. The next move would come from Madison herself, and it would strike not at Robert's empire, but at Khloe's very heart. The city had not yet recovered from the boardroom explosion when Madison launched her final strike. It began with a whisper in the media, then grew into a roar. Headlines filled the morning papers claiming Robert Carter's empire was crumbling under the weight of scandal. Anonymous sources fed stories about bribes, manipulated contracts, and a secretary who had supposedly traded her integrity for power. Each word was poison, carefully designed to wound Khloe. When Khloe arrived at Carter Industries that morning, cameras lined the sidewalk. Flashbulbs erupted as questions were hurled at her like stones. Did Robert pay you to be his girlfriend? Is it true you're blackmailing him? How long until you cash out and disappear? She pushed through them, her face pale, but her back straight, forcing herself not to break. Inside the building, the air was thick with tension. Some employees averted their eyes, afraid to be seen offering support. Others whispered openly, emboldened by the scandal. Khloe sat at her desk, her hands trembling on the keyboard, but her eyes lifted when Robert's office door opened. Robert stood there, calm and powerful in his suit, but his expression was carved from fury. Miss Bennet, he said loud enough for the entire floor to hear, come into my office. She followed him in, closing the door against the weight of gossip outside. He placed a stack of newspapers on the desk, each headline worse than the last. She is determined to destroy you, Khloe whispered. Robert's emerald eyes locked onto hers. No, he said with absolute certainty, she has already lost. Khloe shook her head. These lies. People believe them. They believe I'm nothing but an opportunist. Robert moved to her then, his hands firm on her shoulders. Let them believe what they want. I know the truth, and the truth is, you are the only real thing I have ever had. His words broke through her fear, but before she could respond, the office door burst open. Richard Carter strode in, his face red with anger. Enough, Robert. This madness ends today. Madison has proof. The board will not tolerate this circus. You will end this farce with Miss Bennet, announce your engagement to Madison, or you will be stripped of everything. The silence that followed was electric. Khloe felt her throat close, but Robert's grip on her tightened. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. To his father. No. Richard blinked as though the word was foreign. No, no. Robert repeated, his voice steady. I will not marry Madison. I will not sacrifice my life for your empire. If the board wants my resignation, they can have it, but I will not give up the woman I love. Richard's fury cracked. You would throw away your legacy for her. Robert's voice rose like thunder. She is my legacy. The office door slammed again, and this time it was Theodore Carter. The old patriarch leaned heavily on his cane, but his voice carried the strength of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Enough. The room froze. Theodore's sharp blue eyes swept across Richard, then Madison, who had appeared in the doorway with triumph etched across her face. I built this company on courage, not cowardice, he declared. And I see more of myself in Robert's defiance than in all your arranged alliances. He turned his gaze to Madison, his voice like a blade. You meddled in this family's affairs, spread lies, attempted to destroy a woman's character. That ends now. You will never set foot in this house or this company again. Madison's face drained of color, but before she could respond, Theodore raised his cane and struck it against the floor. Out. The sound reverberated like a gavel. Madison turned and fled, her empire of manipulation crumbling in a single moment. Richard's mouth opened, but Theodore silenced him with a single look. Robert pulled Khloe into his arms in front of them all, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion. I love her. That is my truth. Khloe's eyes burned with tears. I love you too. Theodore's face softened, the stern lines giving way to pride. Then let the world see it. Let them see that Carter Industries is no longer built on cold contracts, but on something real. The news spread within hours, not scandal, not whispers, but photographs of Robert Carter standing tall with Khloe at his side, declaring her as the woman he loved before family, board, and world. The very lies Madison had forged turned to dust against the fire of their truth. That night, in the quiet of his penthouse, Robert slipped a velvet box from his pocket. Inside gleamed a vintage diamond ring, elegant and timeless. He dropped to one knee, his green eyes soft but fierce. 6 months ago, I kissed you to escape a cage. But today, Khloe Bennett, I kiss you to set us both free. Will you marry me? Her tears spilled freely as she whispered yes. And when his lips met hers this time, it was not desperation or defiance. It was the beginning of forever.